Yeah, and also as a friendly reminder, I had asked you for the lessons or the one lesson that you would learn. Please make sure that you send that to me. You have my email. I gave you that yesterday. Send that to me, and I'll be delighted to collect them and send them all to you so that we could all benefit from this knowledge transfer, okay? And also benefit from what some of our colleagues thought was important, beneficial. Maybe we could also find it beneficial. And the last thing that I want to ask you before I turn it over to Matt, yesterday, well, I guess you can't hear me here. Yesterday, there was extensive discussion about conflicts of interest. And what I want to ask you, can some good come out of conflict of interest? I'm going to share some idea with you, a novel idea about this novel conflict of interest. Any thoughts on that? Any good that could come out of conflict of interest? Well, that too, okay. And I'll say something more directly to them. Anybody work for a regulator? Raise your hand. About half of us. You know, every day I wake up, I say, Alhamdulillah, thank God, there is conflict of interest. Why is that? Because if there was no conflict of interest, we would not have jobs, right? The one reason we exist, I really would like to hopefully help change the mindset, because since I came here, there's the mindset that we must make sure that there is no conflict of interest. That concept, that making sure that there is no conflict of interest, is fantasy. It doesn't exist. We exist as regulators, okay, as part of the solution to the conflict of interest, right? We resolve, at least in part, the issues, okay, that arise as a result of conflict of interest. The simplest example, think if you are an investor wanting to invest in a company. How do you know that company is legitimate? How do you know that financial statements are decent or follow some standards? All of that, if you want due diligence, is directly or indirectly done by the regulators. Okay, so yeah, at least those of us who work for regulators, we do benefit, okay, from conflict of interest. It helps create jobs for all of us, okay. I thought I'd share that novel idea with you, so and you will not feel as bad about conflicts of interest from now. It says, yeah, conflict of interest is good, okay, because it helps me, well, it helps me have a job better, yes, it helps me solve society's problems, okay. With that thought, and I think, Matthew, the floor is all yours. You can talk about enforcement and the best practices in the SEC program overview.
Okay, so
are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready. You ready?
Please come on.
Okay, all right, I'll come on. So I was threatened that I needed to do this presentation this morning in Arabic, but from 9 o'clock last night until this morning, I failed to learn the language. You know, I put a book that was Arabic under my pillow. None of it seeped through. Apologies, English is all I have. I could do a little French, a little Spanish, but mainly English. What's that? Indian? The only Hindi I have is like aja and, you know, a lot of food. I do a lot of, so like, you know, bindi and murg and stuff like that. I think that tells you more about me than anything else, but I know the food. So let me just tell you who I am and why you should bother to listen to me. I'm a lawyer. I work for the Securities and Exchange Commission's Office of International Affairs. That's probably not why you should listen to me about this. So I worked in the Division of Enforcement for 13 years, brought a lot of cases. Predominantly, I did accounting fraud and insider trading. Those are the two main kinds of cases upon which I worked. But I got an opportunity to do a bunch of different things for which I'm grateful. In the Office of International Affairs, I do international cooperation for enforcement matters. My primary, by the way, when I get nervous, I talk faster. So I apologize, and I will try to speak more slowly. Okay. And in Arabic. And occasionally in Arabic when somebody throws me a word. So I do international enforcement cooperation. The areas of the globe for which I have primary responsibility as case manager are North America, Asia, and the Middle East, and I'm told this is the Middle East, so it's appropriate that I'm here. International enforcement cooperation, by the way, is if the SCA would need any information or documents from the United States, they would come through me. More likely, I go to them for help in the UAE obtaining bank records or brokerage records. All right, so standard disclaimer is actually less standard for me. I've met Mary Jo White. I've met some of the other commissioners. I guarantee I have opinions that they don't share. So it's important that I disclaim. Okay, so today I'm going to talk to you about, as that last slide said, enforcement, best practices, and what the SEC does. So there are 5 divisions within the Securities and Exchange Commission. The Division of Investment Management that you heard about from Dahlia, Trading and Markets. You've got Corporation Finance. Those are the 3 main regulatory divisions. You've got DERA. I don't even know what DERA stands for, but those are like the quantitative, really smart guys that figure out, big data and statistics. That's the newest division. It's the smallest. There may be like 100 people, so division doesn't indicate size. You've got a bunch of offices, right? My office, Office of International Affairs, that's about 50 people. Office of Chief Accountant, about 50 people. But then you've got the Office of Compliance Inspections and Exams, which is hundreds, if not 1,000 people. So those monikers don't mean much. The Division of Enforcement's job is to recommend to the Commission that it investigate things. And then if those investigations show that there have been violations of the securities laws, recommend enforcement actions and bring those enforcement actions. As I think Aaron said yesterday, we have no criminal authority, right? Don't get to put anybody in jail. They don't trust people like me with guns, so that's good. But instead what we do is we bring civil enforcement actions if our client, the Commission, deems that appropriate. So we investigate and we bring cases. We do on occasion make recommendations to law enforcement agencies, the FBI, Department of Justice, et cetera, about cases that are within our substantive expertise, but for which they'd like to bring criminal prosecution. So this is a very simplified schematic demonstrating the kinds of components of the Division of Enforcement. So you got the boss, right? The director. Currently, that is Andrew Seresny. You saw a picture of Rob Kazami yesterday. That's his former position. You've got investigations and litigation, which is where I was. Office of the Whistleblower, Market Intelligence. These are the market surveillance people that are supposed to process tips, complaints, and referrals. Within the investigations and litigation unit, you've got regional directors, you've got directors, you've got unit chiefs, a lot of bosses, right? The Indians are way down there. We've got specialized units. Specialized units include asset management, which deals with the funds, right? You've got municipal securities, like bond offerings by cities and states and things. You've got market abuse, which deals with regular players in the marketplace, and actually, frankly, is a little bit slightly more sophisticated take on investigations. You've got, all right, complex financial instruments. That's the group that brought the $500 million case against Goldman Sachs. They're the ones that look into complicated things like mortgage-backed securities, funky things like that. I feel like I got one more, which is why I forgot them. The Foreign Corrupt Practices Act group that Aaron supports mainly. Foreign bribery is a violation of our laws for our issuers. So that's the structure. We've got accountants. Most of the Division of Enforcement are lawyers, but we do have accountants. We do have some other non-accountants, non-lawyer specialists. And then you've got the trial unit and trial attorneys whose main facility is the ability to present a case to a jury and navigate the litigation morass that is our justice system. That's the United States. You probably knew that, right? But we have a number of regional offices. This is where I live. I live right there, and I drive there, and it's a really long commute, right? But you see, it's nice, right? But we've got offices that cover the globe or cover the scope of the country. They generally have scope within their geographic area. And so this identifies, some of the states that, like say the Fort Worth regional office mainly is going to serve Texas, Oklahoma, Arizona, and Kansas. That to me is kind of the short straw. but that's me. One of the corollaries that comes out of this slide and this slide, there's a lot of us, and we are decentralized, and we are competitive. So, and I think that's actually one of the advantages of the division enforcement, is that if there's a really cool case that's potentially going to be on the Wall Street Journal, you've got people in 10 plus offices that are going to be looking for that. They're going to want to bring that. You've got people in all these different groups that are going to be interested. So we're internally competitive, which I think is a particularly American thing to be, but I think it actually works because it incentivizes everyone to go and be the advocates for their own portfolio, go get your own cases, right? You want to incentivize your investigators to go find things. And I think that works because they do find things. So these are some statistics. I'll let you look over those. That's in the lower right-hand corner. That's the 807 number that Erin said yesterday. So she was right? Everybody likes to hear that. These are the kind of categories: broker-dealer, delinquent filings, FCPA, financial fraud, insider trading, investment advisor, market manipulation, securities offering, other. Does everyone, oh, by the way, I like to ask questions of the audience, so you're now forewarned. In light of that, so how many people in the room work in the enforcement area? Let me see, show of hands. My two friends here, 3, 4. Okay, how many people in the room are lawyers? I know I got one, I got two, all right. How many people in the room had coffee this morning? Slightly better, okay. So you're my demographic. You're my audience. How many of you know what broker-dealer actions are? Because I don't really know, right? It probably means these are somewhat arbitrary distinctions. We all know what broker-dealers are because we heard yesterday what they are. Trade for their client, buy securities for their client or on their own account, right? Strict statutory definitions. Generally, broker-dealer cases are going to be violations of a particular set of statutes under the 34 Act, probably 15, somewhere in there. But there's a lot of flexibility between these. But one I want to emphasize, securities offerings. We all like offerings. Everybody likes initial public offerings. The kinds of cases that you see in the securities offerings, right, this tranche are going to be, we talked about Ponzi schemes that was mentioned yesterday. Who's familiar with what Ponzi schemes are? Okay. Ponzi schemes are, I take $100 from him, and then I take it, and then I give $10 of that $100 to her, who invested with me previously, and then I give $10 from him to her, who invested $100 with me previously, and then I keep all the money. Right? It's just you rob Peter to pay Paul. It's that concept. Pyramid schemes is basically the same thing. Those are specific kinds of offering frauds. Other kinds of offering frauds are unregistered offerings and the like. Market manipulation, I'm going to talk to you about this afternoon. Insider trading, right? I think that's fairly, does everybody know what that is, generally? Right? You might say insider dealing if you're from the UK, but you're not. Sir?
What is a liquid file?
So I'm glad you asked that. So we've got, and I'm going to be nice. I'm going to be nice because I'm on camera, right? Because I have opinions about this that definitely aren't the same as everyone's. Delinquent filings, so we have lots of issuers. Not all of those issuers file all the paperwork they're supposed to, and they don't do it for a long time. And so you might say, who cares, right? But the problem is those dormant shells, right? They're fully incorporated legal entities that are listed or able to be quoted, right? And able to have the securities traded. Those are great opportunities for fraudsters to take that shell that used to be for mining in Colorado and nothing ever happened and turn it into, change the name, it's now a medical marijuana purveying entity that's based in, I don't know, Vancouver. Where's my friend from Vancouver? Just make sure I haven't offended him. That's the kind of thing, that's what those shells are for. So delinquent filings will be an action under 12J or 12K of the 34 Act to eliminate them. Some of them will actually outright deregister, but sometimes they will technically stop them from being quoted without certain steps being taken that no inactive issuer can ever take. So functionally, it will kill the listing of those shells. They're a big number, right? Yes, Ali.
As we know, the huge cities and citizen US, the number only 807 actions. So that is not reflect the processing and how they.
Well, all right. So what I just to restate, Ali, what I hear you saying, it's not exactly what you're saying, is that we got a lot of people. How come we only have 807 actions? What's up with that? Well, these are hard. Securities cases are hard. I don't want to gloss over this. Most of the actions that people can be sued for, they're allowed to do, right? Insider market manipulation, for example, you're allowed to place trades, right? It's when you place trades in an intentional way to manipulate and defraud. That proving what's going on in someone else's head through objective evidence is difficult, right? I mean, put aside the burden of proof and the 12 jurors and all that. Just proving that you placed these 7 trades at these times and just looking at them proves that you had bad intent. That's difficult. It's difficult. You need, in order to really prove intent to 100% degree, wiretaps, which we can't get, witnesses that will flip, which we try to do and do on occasion, but it's challenging, and then email correspondence and the like. Those are the key ways that I can think of to prove what's in someone's head. They're statements that they've made. So 807, it's still bigger than what the FCA has. It's still bigger than every other regulator. I would just say these are hard, and we are somewhat judicious in what we bring. I think the Division of Enforcement is not predominantly looking to bring parking tickets. They're looking to bring actions where there's lying, cheating, and stealing. Yes, sir.
Do you see a significant change in numbers of enforcement after the financial crisis?
Honestly, my personal opinion, only because Kazami wanted bigger numbers, right? I don't think that after the financial crisis you saw this great spike in enforcement actions because I forget who I was talking to about it yesterday. The financial crisis, we've brought a lot of financial crisis cases, but we brought a lot of cases before that too. I think the thing that explains the increase in cases is the increase in staff, more so than any behavior in the marketplace. There will be bad people in the marketplace in 100 years. There were bad people in the marketplace 100 years ago. The financial crisis was bad. One of the advantages of the financial crisis, if you want to think of it that way, there's a Warren Buffett quote, I think, that when the tide goes out, you see who's not wearing a bathing suit. Madoff was not wearing a bathing suit, right? When the market drops, you see who's really not been keeping up, who's presenting a facade, who's lying. So there's that. But I don't think we saw a real increase in the number of cases after the financial crisis. What you did see was a change in direction and change in emphasis. So you would see about the same time a drop-off in accounting fraud cases, but you would see more in the complex financial instrument area, more in terms of the mortgage-backed securities violations. So I think it's more so than an increase in numbers, it's going to be a change of direction. And like any large ship, directions, it's hard to change direction quickly. Any other questions before I move on? Anybody close to falling asleep? Okay. So here's some numbers, billions of dollars and stuff. Okay. You can look at that. All right, that's enough. Let's talk about investigations. So how do you start? How do you know what to do? All right, so investor complaints, tips from an informant, company self-report, referral, newspaper articles. So I had a boss when I was in enforcement who one of his foci in life was getting up early and reading the Wall Street Journal before everybody else, and then getting to the office and putting down markers for cases, right? And that's how we ended up with the Send-in accounting fraud. That's how we ended up with a number of other very large cases, because they were breaking public reports on those. You know, you take advantage of all the potential sources of information. We talked last night a little bit about bad hedge funds, right? Where you've got some of these hedge funds that have interesting rates of return over time that seem fallacious, seem hard to believe, seem difficult to, you know, make consistent with the reality as we know it. Unless we get information about that, it's hard to investigate. But when we do get information, when tips do come in, we are duty bound to follow up on those, take advantage of those. These are the kinds of papers that we could subpoena. One of the things that this is what I wanted to emphasize. We don't have the legal power to compel someone to make a piece of paper, right? So you're going to hear me talk, when I talk about insider trading, about chronologies, right? We'd like a chronology of events, or we'd like an indication of everyone who had the ability to, who knew about the deal. I really don't have the ability to compel someone to do that by force of law. What I do have the ability to do is compel someone to produce every single piece of paper that would identify who knew about these deals when, and then take all the testimony leading up to that. If you're the general counsel of a company faced with that kind of request, do you want to produce 1 million pages and 20 witnesses, or do you want to give me a 2-page letter that says this is what happened, right? And so that's how that happens. Okay. All those things can be relevant in different ways. Other considerations, right? It's not just about obtaining the information, it's about having the information such that you can use it in court later, right? You can actually use it as proof, as evidence. So admissibility, authenticity, relevance, all those kinds of things are important. Okay, so one of the considerations, and I'm gonna start talking fast now, right? Do you want to pursue, if you want to get testimonial evidence, someone talking to you, answering questions, there are a number of ways you can do it. You can compel it, but you can also call them voluntarily. You can do both, right? You need to make a strategic choice about which of those you do, and there are reasons to go either way. And those reasons may be time sensitive, they may be context sensitive. And actually, this is important. They also may be role sensitive. What is the role of the witness? Who are they? How are they going to react? Are they are they just a witness, or do they have exposure? So those are the advantages of voluntary interviews. Just call them on the phone. And disadvantages, can't use it as evidence. Harder to cross-examine. So this is the SEC Enforcement Manual. This says a lot of things about how the Division of Enforcement works, including all those things. What's important for you is that you can go read it online. This is sec.gov. You go to the Enforcement tab up there, and then when you get to the Enforcement tab, which is here, the thing that's highlighted says Enforcement Manual. I know you can't read that, but trust me, it says Enforcement Manual. So if you really wanted to know what that document said, I almost fell over, you can go there. All right, so making an enforcement recommendation, all right, these are the steps. So you'd open an inquiry, an investigation is a formal thing. I'm probably going to go 10 minutes over. Is that going to be okay? Is it okay? Okay. This is the Wells, if we have evidence of a violation, the Wells process, which I told you about, happens, and then there would be an action memo to the commission, which is a over-lawyered, overwritten document that goes through 20, 30 people, all of whom's their job is to keep the staff attorney from doing something dumb or illegal. This is why I gave the caveats up front, right? But recommends to the commission, the voting members of the commission, that they should take an action, and that action is to authorize, a civil injunctive action, administrative proceeding, seeking, alleging these things, seeking these remedies based on these facts. And then they vote. And sometimes they vote no. It's true. This is the Wells thing that I talked about. But we already talked about that. I don't think I missed. Oh, one thing that is important about the Wells process is that it is a trigger to settlement discussions, right? When you notify someone, when you give them the Wells notice, you basically say, gotcha. See this piece of paper? I gotcha, right? And then it begins a dialogue, potentially, which is an important part of our process. So let's say I could bring an action for $100,000 against Dahlia. And it's going to take me 2 years to investigate, and it's going to take me 3 years to litigate. 5-year investment, $100,000. Right? Instead of that, I have to investigate longer because I know I got to litigate, right? So that 2 years. Let's say instead I do 5 investigations, get 75,000. You know, this is where being a lawyer is not good because it's math, and I'm trying to do the math in my head as I talk, and I'm not sure it's going to work out. So let me just dispense with that. It's the opportunity to bring more actions. Maybe they're not as heavy. Maybe the penalties aren't as great. The proof that we adduce isn't as strong because we don't need to, but we settle. But we settle more of them. Now I know you're thinking, well, my friend over there, it's only 807. Well, why do you need to settle them? There's like 1,300 of you. You could litigate all day, but these are hard. They really are. So we settle most of our cases because we feel we get enough, right? We get enough in remedy. We're not soft. We're not, wimping out. And there are a lot of people. Remember, I mentioned the voting members and the 20 people that make sure that you review the memo. All of them, I guarantee the first thing they're looking for in a settlement memo is, did Grinders wimp out? Did enforcement wimp out? That's the first question they ask. But we're able to bring more actions with the same amount of resources. If you know that it's going to be a fight to the death, you have to put a lot more into it. But when you can walk away with a neither admit nor deny settlement, it's over and it's done with. It's one media day, right? You don't have articles in the paper for the next 3 years about it. You have no collateral consequences in terms of civil liability to plaintiff's bar or admissions that are get you in trouble in a criminal proceeding. It's a lot easier for the defendants to settle, respondents to settle. And so that's why we do it. It allows us to be more effective, we believe. All of our settlements are on that website that I showed you. Litigation releases, administrative releases. We believe in, colloquially, naming, shaming, right? The reputation matters. It's important for investors to be able to look up my name and see whether it's on the SEC website and know whether I'm reputable or not. So there are no secret settlements.
This kind of shows you how we think of the system to combat money laundering. So for those of you in the audience who are from the industry, you are the base, the foundation of the pyramid. You're the first line of defense. Your firms are the first line of defense. So for us, the firms are the broker-dealers, the mutual funds. Those are fully regulated by us. They have full obligations under the AML laws in the United States. I will say that our laws are still in progress. There are entities in the United States that we call them lightly regulated. We haven't fully developed our laws yet for them. For example, investment advisors and transfer agents. Transfer agents are the entities that record the ownership and the transfer of securities in the system. And for foreign entities that operate in the United States, we don't have that, they're not fully regulated by us yet either. Once you go above the first line of defense, SROs, FINRA, for example, is the next step for broker-dealers. And then obviously for us, we think of ourselves as top of the pyramid, even though, as I said, we do not have sole authority. This just touches quickly on some things that Peter mentioned yesterday in general about compliance, which is applicable here as well when you think about AML. which is any firm, for it to really be a responsible partner in this, is going to have a strong culture of compliance, tone at the top, and it's going to have to, at least in the AML world, this is key, know the customer, and we'll go over that a little bit more. So this is one of the FATF, the idea of the FATF program is that you have to have an AML program. That's the first start, have an AML program. And the AML program should have these 4 main components: written policies and procedures, an AML compliance officer. I think you've heard from us a lot about having a person that's designated to actually make sure a compliance program is being followed, being implemented. Independent testing functions and training. And I will go over those individually in the upcoming slides. And we'll go over the customer ID, enhanced due diligence, and transaction reporting. So all this stuff, and that has acronyms and long names, we will go over them. So an AML compliance program is based on the idea of a risk assessment. And this is the part of FATF recommendation number 1, which is that countries should require financial institutions, broker-dealers, banks, investment advisors, investment companies, to identify, assess, and take effective action to mitigate money laundering and terrorist financing risks. I mean, that's just the base of it, right? Like, do something about it is what, in a nutshell, this says. Firms do that by looking at some of the stuff. If you're a broker-dealer, who's your customer? If you're a bank, what's your customer base? Where are they coming from? What kind of accounts are being offered by your institution? And what are the risks with respect to those accounts? And we're going to go through a couple of cases, actually, at the end of the presentation that show how direct market access and sub-accounts presented some serious issues for a couple of U.S. financial institutions. How are the accounts opened? Is it by person, via the internet? Have you seen the person? What kind of information did you collect from your customer? How big is your firm? How big is the firm that is coming in to transact with you? Where is your firm located? Is it local, domestic? Is it foreign? If it's foreign, where? And if you're interested more in this, there is a FINRA rule that, that talks about how this applies to broker-dealers that I have at the bottom of the slide. So as I said, there are 4 components, and this is one of them, having written policies and procedures. Again, this is an interpretive note to the FATF recommendation number 1. You should have effective policies, procedures, and controls so you can manage and mitigate the risks. And those procedures, again, just as we talked about in the investment advisor, investment company space, the same thing. They have to be designed to actually address the risks that are specific to your institutions, to the kind of customer that comes to your institution. They have to be organic. They can't just be one point in time and never changed. You have to look at them, and you have to think about how to amend them to make sure they're up to date, especially if your business model changes or if the law is changing. They have to be approved by senior management. That goes to the tone from the top. If your senior management don't care about AML, just like the CEO of Briggs Bank did not care about AML, obviously, that's not going to be an effective compliance program. And to the point that, Pete made yesterday, if you just outsource this and got a template that says insert name here, you've not done a good job. And if you have a great compliance policies and procedures that you just put in a desk drawer and shut it, you've not implemented. Yes, sir.
You mentioned the previous slide, the AML compliance officer. Does this person differ from the compliance officer or the CCO, or they can be the same person doing what?
They can be the same person, but again, it comes down to, does the person have capacity, or have you overloaded that person with so much that they are not able to do it? Does the person have expertise? So let's say you have a fantastic chief compliance officer, but that person knows nothing about AML. Should they be your AML compliance officer? Or maybe the chief compliance officer can have someone designated to AML, and that person really knows the AML, and that works. So it comes down to the idea of it's someone senior enough, has expertise, and has the time to actually implement it. But it can be the same person. FINRA has put out a few practices for, in their case, broker-dealers, because that's their supervisory authorities over broker-dealers. Some things that firms should think about when they're actually putting together written policies and procedures, and I outlined some of them. So they should contain a statement setting forth a policy for prohibiting money laundering and what the effects of money laundering would be. The idea behind this, again, is the tone of the firm. It's the culture of the firm. If you have even though it seems obvious, if you just say my policy is to prohibit this and to mitigate against it, you're setting a tone for the firm. And they should contain procedures for employee accounts, for monitoring red flags. We'll go over red flags, but essentially they're the triggers that show you something is going on that should not be going on. And allowing for the confidential reporting by employees so that they, sort of akin to the whistleblower, there's no fear of coming up and talking to someone about information if they think something is going on. So for those of you on the examination enforcement side, some examination issues to consider when you're going in are the resources commensurate with the risk? Did the firm put in their AML compliance policies and procedures, their program, the mapping of the risks that correspond to the type of the firm, the type of customers? And did they designate enough people, enough resources to be looking at all that? If you have automated programs to detect suspicious activity, are they working properly? And if something is identified, what happens with that? Another thing to consider, which is on the list, is are there appropriate checks and balances? For every system, there should be checks and balances. If something fails, there's something else to pick up on the other end. So are there any checks and balances in the system so that perhaps not one person is responsible for the whole thing and that person can kind of, blow it off and not do a good job about it? So the AML compliance officer, it does have to be someone who knows about AML. It's these slides give a general overview, but it's a very complex area of the law. Can that person talk to all relevant persons in the firm? Is the person senior enough? Does it have access? Does the person have sufficient resources? Is it a one person, like if you have a huge broker-dealer and then you assign one person to AML, is that enough? And do they have sufficient authority and autonomy to make the decisions for the firm? That's pretty key, authority and autonomy. Again, it goes to, are they senior enough? Do they know what they're doing? And then again, FINRA has put out a statement about this. Firms should vest this person with full responsibility and authority to make and enforce AML, and a compliance officer should report to a member of the board or a high-level executive for this to be an effective program. Some exam issues, obviously key one, does the firm have a designated compliance officer for AML? Does that compliance officer have the background, the expertise to perform this function? And is there a record of that person actually meeting with the senior executives in the firm? And does that person, for example, if it's a combined function, is that person given sufficient time to actually run an AML program? Independent testing or auditing functions. So the recommendation is that this should be done at least annually. It should cover all areas of the business. It can't be, I'm going to sample. So this year I'm going to do business unit 1 and 2, and then next year I'm going to do 3, 4. It has to cover all areas of the business, all product lines. So one of the, this is probably basic, but the heart of an AML compliance program is know your customer. You gotta know who you're dealing with. So you have to have a CIP, a customer identification program. For us, this is imposed on our broker-dealers and funds through the U.S. Patriot Act. Funds and broker-dealers have to have a reasonable belief that they know the true identity of their customer, and they take reasonable measures to verify that identity. There are 4 elements to this kind of legal requirement. Get an ID before opening an account. Verify that ID is real. Maintain a record that you actually got that ID. And for us in the United States, and I think for some countries as well, check against government lists if those exist. So what kind of IDs? Again, it depends on the jurisdiction. Here are some things that we look at in the United States. For individuals, we need to make sure that, they get the name, date of birth, address, social security number. For foreign nationals, passport numbers, or some other foreign government issued documents. And for entities, similar situations, including their tax identification numbers. The first one I'm going to talk about is for a broker-dealer case study on controls over material non-public information. So broker-dealers in the United States are required to establish and maintain and enforce written policies and procedures reasonably designed to detect and in light of the business, the misuse of material non-public information. Because brokers in the U.S. may have multiple areas where they're having non-public information, either in mergers, there may be another issues on takeovers, client trade orders, and other issues where there might be information coming in that may need to be protected from misuse by the associated persons that work for the broker-dealer. So this is a case, and so the case that I'm going to show you, these are all the public releases for it. There was an SEC settled action, there was a settled FINRA action, and there was also a settled state action, which predates for the state of Massachusetts. You can see all the sort of different regulatory organizations that have supervision authority and or enforcement authority over our regulated entities in the United States. And so this was a case where it involved Goldman Sachs. And from 2006 to 2011, Goldman Sachs tried to start some new ideas to try and be able to compensate their top clients and to generate ideas for trading. One of them was where they started holding these weekly huddle meetings where their research analysts and traders met to discuss sort of short-term ideas on market color, where market was going to go, certain ideas related to covered stocks. This was a practice where Goldman Sachs research analysts were met to provide their best trading ideas to the firm traders and possibly also later pass them on to a select group of clients. They also started something else called the Asymmetric Service Initiative. Again, it was trying to give their top clients access or a little bit more information from their research analysts and share information and trading ideas. Now, Goldman actually had procedures in place for all for their research analysts. And so from discussing, one, they prohibited the research analysts from discussing unpublished research with clients or anyone outside of the research division. They had prohibitions against analysts selectively disclosing information or material statements before those statements were broadly distributed to the firm's clients. Any new material statements by an analyst required dissemination to all the firm's clients. And broad dissemination was required of all research reports unless it was something that was purely a factual announcement or reiteration of prior information. It also it allowed for internal short-term trading issues or market color to be disseminated, but not considering specific price or recommendations. So they had these huddles where the research analysts would talk to the traders and sort of discuss issues in their sector, possible issues with the companies that they were looking at, but they had these prohibitions of the research analysts actually sharing information about changes in recommendations, whether it's from a buy, sell, or neutral, if there are any changes, any discussion of price, with particular just focus on these companies that they were covering. So here are some just general examples that were in the SEC's order that caused the SEC concern to take action. So for example, there was a company that was discussed in April 2009. 4 days prior, the analyst recommended a change to the review committee of the research report for that particular company. During this huddle, the analyst stated that while investor sentiment was low, he anticipated or expected an interest in that stock in the industry. And then 5 days later, the company was upgraded based on the review committee from a neutral to a buy. Second example was a company B had analysts covering them had already upgraded the company from a neutral to a buy. During the huddle, the analyst looked for a more positive turn in his group and highlighted the company. Later that day, the analyst recommended an upgrade in company B at a research meeting, and 4 days later it was upgraded. So this sort of shows you they didn't actually give specific information that this company was going to be upgraded, but at the same time, them sharing this information caused the SEC staff a concern that there was a chance that information about upcoming changes were being communicated not in compliance with Goldman's procedures. Looking at the procedures that Goldman had around these huddles, the SEC found that the compliance did not attend all the huddles. They were not there. They didn't take notes. There were hundreds of instances where a rating was changed within 5 business days of a huddle, but there were no records of investigation by compliance staff, no looking into it, no inquiry by compliance staff except for a few limited circumstances. Complete documentation wasn't kept of the huddles, and records of the compliance questions that were raised after these huddles were not kept. In addition, Goldman didn't really do a lot of surveillance on the traders in relation to trading ahead of research changes or their analysts. And so that's something that the enforcement action noted. So the SEC brought a settled action against Goldman. We charged them with lacking adequate procedures and policies in place to attack these weekly huddles, and they actually discontinued the practice. Especially because the firm's analysts could share material non-public information with traders during with these traders about upcoming changes in these huddles. The order also found that their surveillance and customer trading was deficient. The Goldman settled the case for agreeing to pay a $22 million penalty to the SEC and FINRA. They also did a complete review of their policies, changed their procedures, and adopted ways to address the deficiencies, make sure that compliance staff are more incorporated in discussions. They actually stopped both of these types of huddles and or the AIS, the calls to the clients. And then Goldman had also previously settled with the state of Massachusetts and paid $10 million in a civil penalty. This is an example of a case where, and I think it's a little unique because, and it sort of goes to your question, so there weren't any actual underlying violations that I'm aware of where there were money laundering actions brought, but there were so many red flags, and the firm didn't actually undertake to do anything about the red flags. So this is a settled action for deficient customer identifying procedures. And so there was a firm, it's actually in Miami, and it opened up an omnibus account. Well, so both the bank and the firm were owned by a large umbrella corporation located in Portugal. So the bank, it's a Central American bank, opened an omnibus account with a broker-dealer in the United States in 2013. 2003. But the account opening documents at the broker-dealer in the U.S. only named the bank as the omnibus account holder. When in fact there were several corporate entities and sub-accounts sub-accounts owned by non-U.S. citizens that were actually part of this omnibus account. The sub-account holders interfaced directly with the firm's representatives. They placed orders, they did trades, they requested account maintenance and execution, and the Central American Bank was never involved in the discussions between the firm and the account holders. So between April 2003 and August 2013, the sub-account holders executed over $23 million in transactions, but there was no sort of interface or accountability with the Central American Bank. It was direct access between the entities, the individuals, and the broker in Miami. So especially for a broker-dealer must reasonably supervise anyone who's associated persons with the broker-dealer. So it can be, well, I'll get to that in a second, but the
the people that must do this, as I said, was the firm supervisor, the firm president, any supervisors. But it's typically an associated person is an employee, right, of a broker-dealer. It's very easy to figure out employee. But they have been instances where people that are accessing broker-dealer systems aren't employees, but should be treated like employees, should be treated like associated persons. So that can be any person who the broker-dealer is controlling indirectly or directly. So this is an example, Veramis, which Dalia also mentioned, of a case where the SEC brought a settled action against the broker-dealer, not for failure to supervise their employees, because there were very few employees at this firm, but actually failing to supervise people that had access to their trading platform. So Veramis was an Ontario-based brokerage firm with no employees, operations, books, or records in the US. So Peter Beck was the founder, the president, the sole director of both Veramis and its affiliates. And then they had one co-founder, Charles Kim, who was the co-founder and president. But while this was, so it had no operations in the US, it was operating in Canada, had access to US trading systems, and it was a worldwide trading business that enabled up to 5,000 traders to as many as 200 trading floors in 30 countries. It allowed them to gain access to the US markets. And the business was essentially operated through the Canadian-based brokerage firm. So what the firm did was, for these overseas day traders, they provided them with capital. They determined the amount of capital available to each trader. They enforced daily loss limits on each trader. They monitored the trader's profit and loss to see if they were either exceeding the amount of capital that they could have, or exceeding the amount of losses that they allowed for each trader. They could remotely block access for the trader who loses too much money, and they had the ability to reprimand, to restrict, suspend, and terminate any of the traders. But the traders were required to exclusively use the Veramis' system. They would trade their capital, and they had to share part of their profits with Veramis, and they had to follow their rules and restrictions. So the SEC order found that these day traders were associated persons controlled by Veramis, and they were really Veramis' proprietary trading force. So from 2007 to 2010, the overseas traders engaged in manipulative trading known as layering. And so layering is where you put in orders that you expect to cancel in order to manipulate the price. And then as the price moves, they were canceling orders. Both the president and co-president learned from various sources, including 3 broker-dealers, and an employee, that the overseas traders were placing manipulative layer trades, and they didn't take any steps to prevent it. They got emails from people, they recognized that this was going on in the US market. They actually told the traders, you can't do this in Canada, but it's fine in the US. They also had an instant messaging system that the company was using to sort of talk to the traders or have communications. And the federal securities laws require that any communications that are taking place in the broker-dealer are preserved. And they failed to retain instant messages related to any of the business. And they also failed to maintain any suspicious activity report filings related to the manipulative trading.